Hello class, this is Christopher Brittwall's Curriculum Audit Digital Presentation. Now, we'll start off with the background of the school district and the school that I'm auditing. CCS's current school improvement goal is increasing literacy in all content areas, including science, which includes environmental science, the curriculum that I'll be auditing. Recently, they adopted the Learning-Focused Schools model, which is pushing common planning and assessment for the first time in subjects like environmental science. Demographically speaking, the population of the county is 69% white, 27% Black, and 5% Hispanic or Latino. As far as labor participation is concerned, only 55% of adults aged 25 or over are participating in the labor market, and 21% of all residents are below the poverty line. 78% of residents hold high school diplomas, and 14% of residents hold bachelor's degrees or higher. So all in all, the labor participation in the county is low. Many people are below the poverty line, and very few people are getting higher education. When you look at the population of the county compared to the population of the school, the percentage of white students drops, percentage of Black and Hispanic and Latino students increases to 50% white, 36% Black, 9% Hispanic or Latino. 36% of all students are economically disadvantaged in the school. And if you look here at this image, economically disadvantaged students tend to perform worse on standardized tests than non-economically disadvantaged students, which may be what's causing the low CCRPI score at the school. The CCRPI score is 67.3, which is lower than 66% of all of Georgia's schools. When we look at what the school needs to make as a priority, I purposefully left out this on the previous slide because it's really the most shocking demographic that I read about when I was looking at the census information for the county. 40% of households do not have internet access in the county in which I work. 25% of households do not have a computer. So I started thinking about this, and the school has access to a lot of technology that the community does not. We should look into becoming a one-to-one technology school because digital literacy is a priority that we need to be working on. In the world that we are currently living in, if students cannot access the internet and cannot get into that wealth of information the internet offers, then they're going to be left behind. As a result of this, I believe that we're below the state average in college and career readiness. Many students, they don't have access to the internet, and they can't really help themselves as efficiently at home as other students can. Also, another reason I believe that we're below the college and career readiness standard for the state is that many students have been given safety nets within the school. No student is allowed to make a score below a 50 in my school, and that promotes mediocrity. Constantly, students are thinking, oh, I made a 90 the first semester. I could fail everything and still pass the class. EOC assessments have very little weight within the school. In the EOC courses, they only count 20% of the course grade, meaning that a student with an A or a high B average could completely fail and ignore the EOC and still pass the class. Sometimes we run into that attitude of mediocrity. And then when you look at courses like the one that I'm auditing, environmental science, there is no EOC. And the entire final exam score is teacher made, and as a result, the standard could vary greatly from what the state standard is. When we look at the background of my curriculum, there is no official curriculum for the school. The curriculum has been designed and maintained by only one teacher at a time for the past 17 years. It may have been designed and maintained even longer. It's just that the teacher that's been at the school the longest has only been there 17 years and has said to me that only one teacher has been in control of the curriculum each year for all of her 17 years. Now, the structure of the current curriculum draws on two sources: the Georgia Standards of Excellence, which were formerly the GPS, the Georgia Performance Standards, and the 2008 edition of the Holt Environmental Science textbook. The Georgia Standards of Excellence increased rigor for the course because the Georgia Performance Standards, they use verbiage like relate and recognize, very low depth of knowledge questioning. And then the Georgia Standards of Excellence, they moved to things like develop and use models and predict, higher order thinking questions. So when the standards changed, the rigor of the course increased, which is something that we need to look at when we're auditing curriculums, because when you look at the standards changing, everything about the curriculum has to change to accommodate that change. Now, the Holt Environmental Science textbook's chapter structure is going to be the basis for the curriculum map, not the standard order. And the reason that this environmental science textbook has taken over as the primary vehicle for standard delivery is because of the placement of the pollution standard. The pollution standards in the Georgia Standards of Excellence, they're actually the they're the fourth set of standards in the set of 5. They come before the population standards. The population standards, being the final standard in the Georgia Standards of Excellence, doesn't really make that much sense to me, because as population rises, the human ability to pollute rises as well. So if you understand the scope of the human population, you can better understand the scope of how much pollution humans can put out there. The textbook, on the other hand, does not have this problem. The textbook, it places the population chapter before the pollution chapters. That way students can get a better understanding of how the human population's growth has affected pollution later on. Now, this order does not work as well for transient students, because if other school systems are teaching in the order of the standards, if the student transfers in late in the school year, they may transfer in after my courses went over populations and before we've gone over pollution, so they would completely miss the population unit and just get a double dose of the pollution unit. When we look at current instructional strategies used, when starting a lesson, direct instruction through lecture is the primary means of instruction when I don't believe that students have a lot of prior knowledge on the content. And if I do believe that they have a lot of prior knowledge, we'll do an exploratory lab. And the reason for this, in the curriculum audit paper, I cite a study that talks about how students that get exploratory labs, if they don't have a lot of prior content knowledge, those labs are less meaningful for them. They tend to get lost and not understand what they're doing. So if students don't have that prior instruction, if it's not something that they may have learned in a previous class, then I go on ahead with a direct instruction, give them a little bit of knowledge up front. That way they can do the exploratory labs later on. Most of the learning in the class is going to be through exploratory collaborative projects. The reason I like to do this is that it increases digital literacy first and foremost. They're constantly working on the computer. They're working with all these digital platforms such as the Google Suite, video podcasting services like Screencast-O-Matic and Flipgrid. And as a result, they're getting those skills that they can later use in college and possibly their careers in terms of working online. Now, the reason that collaborative projects really help out the course in terms of its rigor is that collaborative projects cover the standards more accurately than lecture and test style teaching. The standards, as I mentioned earlier, they ask students to look at models, to create models, and to predict things. They don't ask students to simply recall what was said in lecture. Students, they exhibit a strong preference for collaborative assignments. That's something that I also mention in my paper. I cite another study that talks about how students have an overwhelming preference to work with each other. They learn better with each other. They are more willing to learn when they're working with each other. So that's another reason for the collaboration. Now, according to the school improvement goal, we're supposed to be increasing literacy, and each unit contains a plethora of writing assignments. Students have to write every day in the environmental science course, which gets me a lot of complaints because I used to be an English teacher and they're like, Mr. Wall, remember, you're not teaching English anymore. And I'm like, I know, but you're supposed to be writing in every single class. And I have to give them lectures about how they're supposed to write in every single class to increase their literacy. Now, when we look at the curriculum, the thing that worries me most about the setup of the curriculum is that one teacher is in control of the curriculum, which stifles innovation, opens the curriculum up to manipulation and corruption because there are so few quality controls. I mean, if you look at the environmental science curriculum, currently one teacher is in charge of everything. There's no state mandated assessment, so the final outcome is all teacher led. The teacher makes the final exam, the teacher grades the final exam, and if the teacher wanted to inflate test scores, they very well could. There's no quality control on that. And that opens up the potential for system-wide corruption because the CCRPI scores are based on pass rates, or at least partially based on pass rates. So if the teacher wanted to inflate his or her pass rates, he very well could, because there are no quality controls in place other than occasional interjections by administrators when they walk into a room. And the mean failure rate for this course is currently 4.4%, which is very low. And this could be a result of high content retention because the teacher is doing a good job, or it could be the result of lax standards, which is why I look at the standards and how they're covered on the tests. And I do note that the tests closely mirror the standards. Let's look at an example question from one of the tests. Create a diagram that demonstrates the flow of energy in chemical compounds in photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Be sure to label the producers, consumers, types of energy, and each chemical compound involved in the process. Your answer should include a written explanation of how the law of thermodynamics is upheld and why each chemical compound is necessary to complete the process. Now, the most directly corresponding standard is develop and use a model based on the laws of thermodynamics to predict energy transfers throughout an ecosystem. food chains, food webs, and trophic levels. All right, so if we look at this example question and compare it to a corresponding standard, I immediately note that the student is required to create a model or a diagram in both of these. So the verbiage is being met. Also, when you look at key terms like the law of thermodynamics, it's also included in the question. And I would even argue that the question goes further into another standard. There's another environmental science standard that talks about the processing of materials that are required for life, such as carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen. And this question even goes into that a little bit, giving students a little bit of acceleration into the next set of standards. So the questions definitely match what the standard is asking, which is a positive sign that the curriculum isn't being corrupted, that the teacher involved is doing his job and trying to make the curriculum be as close to the state standard as possible. But that doesn't mitigate that there is potential there for corruption, and that potential for corruption is something that could lead to stakeholders being uneasy about the program if they give it enough thought. So what do I recommend for this course? This course should use its curriculum to improve CCRPI scores and biology test scores. Now, the reason I say this is 60% of the environmental science standards correlate with the biology standards. What we should do as a school system is move environmental science to the freshman level and have students take biology after environmental science. That way they get a double dose of all of the ecology and population standards. Also, we should use collaborative planning and common assessments. Multiple teachers of the subject remove some potential for corruption. If we've got a bunch of teachers looking at the standards and trying to accommodate the standards by creating common assessments, then they're less likely to miss a potential standard, and they're less likely to inflate test scores because they'll constantly be comparing scores to each other. Also, if we've got collaborative planning and common assessments, we're increasing stakeholder confidence. If the stakeholders see that there are more people involved in this process and more people actually looking at the standards and making sure that there is a strong correlation between the course content and the standards, then I believe that the community might have more confidence in the program. Now, we should also increase curriculum security in case of a teacher departure. Back in the 2013-2014 school year, the teacher that was in charge of the environmental science curriculum passed away, and the entire curriculum was lost. The school doesn't currently require teachers to use Google Drive to back up shared curriculum maps, lesson plans, materials, and tests, but the school system definitely should move to a shared test bank, materials, lesson plans, and curriculum map system to prevent such a thing from happening in the future. Finally, to conclude, a singular teacher in control of the curriculum is potentially dangerous. We need to have multiple teachers in charge of each curriculum, especially when we're planning for non-EOC courses, because again, there's no state control. The only control that happens is at the school level. So if we want there to be some confidence in the system, if we want students to actually get the level of instruction that they need, we need to make sure that we have multiple teachers looking in on this curriculum and planning it, because that will increase the amount of rigor in the curriculum and increase the amount of innovation in the curriculum. We'll constantly be looking for weaknesses in each other's test scores, and as a result, we can constantly set ourselves goals for improvement. Now, the learning focus change is positive for this course. It's pushing this narrative of we should collaborate, we should commonly assess, which is how this curriculum is going to move away from its stagnant one teacher in charge, one teacher in the routine kind of model to a collaborative, we're bouncing ideas off of each other and constantly looking for areas of improvement model. All right, that concludes my curriculum audit. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.